This is Rich Vedvik, also known as Keep Hope Alive on the audio forums. In this video I'm going to talk about making a splice in the middle of a speaker wire, or a wire in general. You're going to run across this anytime you want to make a tap for doing alarm installs or even trying to generate a remote turn on for a vehicle. So what I got here is I got a wire that's continuous, and I'm going to take this wire and I'm going to connect it right in the middle of it. Now the best way to do this, and this is again where your automatic wire strippers come in handy, insert it right in the middle of the run, give it a squeeze, and now you've already exposed that center piece of wire. Doing that with standard wire strippers is going to be a little more time consuming. Now what you want to generate inside this wire is you want to break and separate these wire strands without actually breaking any of them. You want to separate them. So essentially you end up with a hole between them. And I can take my little tool, and this is where a little jeweler screwdriver is going to come in handy. Take a little jeweler screwdriver, insert it in there. Now you can take your new wire, strip a little bit of it back, and you're going to insert this in here, and you're going to twist it around, and then you're going to solder it. And the reason you're going to solder it is because anytime you're going to make a splice, you want to maximize the integrity of that connection as high as possible. Alright? So essentially what I've done is I have my normal wire that's continuous, and I've introduced a third wire. And that third wire, I inserted it in the hole, and then I wrapped it around. Now you might not have a set of helping hands when you're actually working in your car, but being that this is at a workbench and the wire is not taut, I have a set of helping hands. I use these for pretty much anything that I do related to wiring, whether it's on a bench or in a car. If I'm going to solder, a set of helping hands helps. My solder station is a Weller. Essentially I have a $30–40 Weller here. It's got a little built-in stand. It's a nice station. In order to keep my tip clean, I'm going to use a brass wool. This does not cool down your tip when you want to clean it. And I'm going to solder it. A couple soldering basics. Your number one goal here is to bring the temperature of the wire up to the melting point of your solder. There are various types of solder. Some of them have lower melting points of others. If it's silver bearing solder with no lead, it takes a little bit higher temperature. If it's got a little bit of lead in it, that lowers the melting point and allows it to work. However, of course, if it has lead in it, you don't want to breathe that smoke in. So when you're going to solder, you're going to want to get some solder flowing, and that typically starts by putting a little bit on the tip there. And once you get a little blob on the tip, you're going to wait until the wire reaches the same temperature as the tip and the solder, and you're going to watch that solder essentially flow into the wire. Now it's always a good idea to make sure your tip's already pre-warmed. This one wasn't. And you'll know once you get it hot enough, it'll meld right into the wire. Once it melds into the wire, then you can start applying more solder, but you don't want to always apply solder at the tip. Applying solder at the tip doesn't necessarily do you as much good, because you want solder to flow on all the wire strands. So essentially it becomes one giant metal mass. Solder is the one type of connection that you're not going to have to worry about in the future if done properly. So now I got my tip on the bottom of this wire, and I'm applying solder to the top. If you see giant blobs of solder, essentially that means you did not get your wire hot enough, or that you have simply too much on there. In this case, I'm going to support that wire a little bit better. Clean off my tip. Call that pretty good. Now I have a wire that's electrically continuous, and of course, next thing you do is to insulate it. The only electrical tape I use is 3M Super 33 Plus. It's good for a wide variety of temperatures that you're going to encounter in car audio. But essentially, it's the only electrical tape that I'm going to use. Now, we have electrical tape, so we have it insulated. The last thing we want is we want a little bit of strain relief. So I'm going to come in with a zip tie, smaller the better in this case. I'm going to use that zip tie to provide some mechanical strain relief on that electrical connection. So now if I start to pull on this, I'm not pulling on the solder point, I'm just pulling at the junction, and the insulation is kind of keeping everything in the same place. Hope you enjoyed.